Elisha says, is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves and vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female slaves? The indication we get from the tone of Elisha's question is that Gehazi didn't realize that his actions of taking from Naaman were inappropriate for the time frame. You see, as I explained to you in last week's message, Elisha's actions of not taking anything from Naaman as payment for his healing was a means by which the Lord wanted Naaman to come into the understanding of the breadth of his grace. You'll remember that grace cannot be bought or earned, but is only freely given by God. The time in which Elisha and Gehazi were operating in was a time of grace. A time in which the Lord was sending a clear message to mankind that his grace was matchless. And because this was a time frame of God's tremendous grace, then those who had declared themselves as followers of him had to adhere to this time frame with everything they had. You see, if we're going to be disciples, if we're really going to be moving from membership to discipleship, we've got to follow God with everything we've got. Not just with our mouths and saying some stuff, but we got to be about some action. What Gehazi is being accused of through Elisha's questioning is not living up to the standard that was a byproduct of the time frame that they were in. Let me say it like this. Gehazi was inattentive to the fact that God desired, as opposed to being worried so much about himself and what he could get, that he be concerned with the livelihood of somebody else. Y'all don't hear me in here this morning. If we're going to live our lives as disciples, we must realize that although the years have passed and society seems to be shifting in thought, that we are still operating in God's time of grace. And if we're living in God's time of grace, we've got to stop being so self-centered and caught up in what we can get and how we can get it and when we're going to get it, and start worrying about somebody else. In other words, the final thing we got to realize about God's timing is that it always indicates that it's time to help somebody else. God is calling us to be a congregation of disciples that are not just focused on what happens inside these four walls, but what happens outside the four walls. What's happening with the homeless folks in our community? What's going on with the elders in the community who can't take care of themselves? What's going on with those who are suffering through abuse in their homes? What's happening with the youth of our community who need to see strong role models but can't find them? What's going on with those strung out on crack who always got to have a drink before they start their day? The Lord is calling us to care for others, because when we care for them, it's an act of faith that he will in turn take care of us. God's time is always grace time. And I'm so glad today that his clock is continually set and helping others along the way. Because if the time of grace had run out, I don't know how you feel, but I'd be standing on the outside of his grace looking in right now. I'd still be waddling around in my sin. Still be just relying on my kinfolks. I would have just given up and thrown in the towel. But because of God's focus on me, he reached down in the midst of all my mess, saved me in the nick of time from myself. He let me know that he is in full control. The old folks say he picked me up. He turned me around and he placed my feet on solid ground. He sent his son Jesus to give his whole self as the fulfillment of the penalty for my sins. Because of God's focus on me, Jesus hung on the cross at Calvary. Because he cared for me, he hung there so everybody could see. Because he loved me, nails were placed in his hands and in his feet. Because he loved me, he endured the suffering of the cross. Because he loved me, Jesus was pierced in his side. Because he loved me, he was laid in a borrowed tomb. But I'm excited to let you know a victory over anything we come up against. Just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right in the nick of time, God showed up in the midst of that fiery situation. Just as Daniel, right in the nick of time, the Lord showed up and shut the lion's mouth. Godly people said, you can ask the children of Israel, trapped at the Red Sea by that mean old Pharaoh and his army. They had water all around them. And Pharaoh on that track, from out of nowhere, God stepped in and cut a highway just like that. He's an all-time God. Yes, he is. I said he's an all-time God. Yes, he is. He's an all-time God. Yes, he is. Is there anybody here who can testify to the Lord being on time in your situation? Him not leaving you out there on your own, but he gave it all just for you, right in the nick of time. He's better than MacGyver. He's better than the government. He's better than your mama. He's better than your daddy. Right in the nick of time. Right in the nick of time. He steps in. That's what I like about God's timing, is that his time is always on time. So maybe there's one who's here this morning who's been trying to do this life thing all on your own. I'm standing to tell you right now that this is the time to choose you this day whom you will serve. This is the time to try something new. Because what you've been trying hadn't been working.